The rural society changed during the Industrial Revolution, becoming less populated. Its social structure changed in that the higher class became even more rich and the lower class's conditions worsened, and production was increased. While urban society during the Industrial Revolution became more densely populated, conditions worsened, and cities were divided between the rich and the poor.
The Industrial Revolution had an enormous impact on rural society. Before the Industrial Revolution, farmhands would work in fields, providing for locals in small villages or towns. These simple agricultural methods used by these farmhands, in addition to cattle, could provide for a few people at a time. Animals were skinned and hide and fur was produced. No animal would go to waste. Things were not mass-produced as much since there were not many machines in rural societies, only laborers. The Industrial Revolution had revolutionized the way rural society would revolve. The population would become much less densely populated because of many farmhands moving to more urbanized societies to work in factories operating machinery. This is not to say that there were not any more farmhands working on the fields. It is true to say, though, that there was more machinery that could operate on its own on the fields, but there would still need to be farmhands to operate these machines. Inventions like the steam engine easily took over the job of horses' heavy pulling. Internal combustion engines soon became the power for tractors. The internal combustion engines also contributed to machines like the combine harvester. Rural society was exceedingly impacted by the Industrial Revolution due to new machinery and a much less necessity of manual labor. Coming from a small society where everything was manually produced and going to a less densely populated where machinery would take over the majority of laborers' work majorly impacted the lives of all those who lived in these small rural societies.
As the cottage system failed in England, the rural workers migrated to the cities in their thousands. As these people flooded the cities, so was the housing supply and the sewer systems. The rich were usually the inhabitants of the cities until this time, and the poor were put into hastily thrown-up housing. The birth of the slums. These houses were built very close together and were very costly to live in. Therefore, many of the people who moved to the urban areas were poverty-stricken, if they had a house at all. Crowded living at this time was a breeding ground of diseases. To name one disease that was furthered by this new way of life is cholera. As people used the crowded facilities around them, the sewers became overused in the old pipes in cities such as London, and the waste leaked into the water supply. This became the perfect breeding ground for cholera and a great way to spread to the populace. This kind of disease spreading was common in most cities. The jobs taken by the new inhabitants of cities were also quite dangerous. A worker in a textile mill could get their hand caught in a machine and have it sliced off. The same could happen with a person's foot or even just a finger. Then the worker would be fired and given no compensation. The bosses of the factory did not want a crippled worker to slow down production after all. If a limb wasn't lost, then one's lungs could be filled with the fibers of wool from the machines, and the person could suffocate on the fibers.
The power and systems developed during this time were the precursors of many technologies that are now necessary to the world's population. The basis of the agricultural technologies now used to produce the tons of food needed to feed the populations were started by the development of machines such as the seed mill, ideas such as crop rotation and selective breeding. Another agricultural invention was the cotton gin. These developments were for increased revenue but also caused increased production in food, which in turn caused the population to rise. Electricity was another development of this time. Electricity has become one of our main ways to power machines and appliances that produce many of the items that we use, wear, and see in the world today. There was a constant stream of new ways to use power. Michael Faraday invented the electric motor, Alessandro Volta invented the battery, Henry Ford applied mass production of cars, and many other inventors came up with ideas that broke open new fields of study and employment. The combinations of ideas and technologies developed during this time led to computers, phones, and other items that were developed in the Second Industrial Revolution.